All right, let's go ahead and get started. As you saw, we're recording this session. I hope everybody's Tuesday is off to a good start. My name is Mary Catherine. I'm a teaching and learning specialist at CTRL. Shed is not able to join us today, so it'll just be me. But hopefully for those of you who were able to attend yesterday, you got their perspective as well. So we'll jump on in. As a reminder, I think most of you are familiar with our guidelines. Throughout this workshop, we ask that you make yourself comfortable, stim, rock, fidget, knit, craft, etc. as needed. Be present in a way that works for you. Ask questions and share ideas in the chat. Use the raise hand function under the reactions if you'd like to speak up, which you are welcome to at any time, and be generous with your knowledge and respectful of others' knowledge that we all share. So by the end of the session today, our learning outcomes are for you all to identify multiple types of media that you can engage in your courses to better support your students in reaching the course learning objectives or outcomes, and explain the reasoning behind using a variety of media to communicate course concepts and skills. So brief warm-up quickly in the chat. What kinds of learning materials do you already assign to your students? We can think about your typical academic article, textbook, that sort of thing. What else do you assign? For example, I teach in the performing arts department. My background is in musicology, so I'll assign a lot of music recordings for students to analyze. Yes, I see some great alternatives coming in. TED Talks or special videos, short YouTube video lectures, recordings of talks given by scholars in the field. Ooh, even video games. Chelsea will have to hear about that. Podcasts are a great one. Just listen in. Yeah, these are all great starting points to kick off our discussion today. Published articles, book chapters, websites. Websites are another good one. It doesn't only have to be text from academic sources, even films. Yeah. Okay, so what is multimedia? It sounds like you all have a pretty good idea already, but we'll just go over it to make sure everybody's on the same page. It refers to the medium of the materials that students engage in our courses, and multimedia is using multiple types of those media. So typical includes academic articles and books, textbooks, novels, art, music, and the humanities, depending on your field, maybe some raw data in the sciences. Less common, and a few of these we've already talked about, but TED Talks, documentaries, news clips, podcasts and radio productions, interviews, either the video interview or a transcript, blogs, graphics and artistic representations. All of these can also be used to support our students' learning. So here are some examples that we came up with on some replacements. And for those of us who were in Shed session yesterday, and I'll mention this again later, but this isn't about adding a lot of stuff, but how can we design each assignment or activity for our students in a way that that supports them. So one example is reading on how activism has changed since the 1970s could be replaced by a series of photos of activists since the 1970s that students then analyze. A textbook chapter on virus infections could be replaced by a podcast explaining virus infections. A reading on eugenics replaced by a video explaining eugenics. Reading on storytelling formats for a writing course could be replaced by a TED Talk on effective storytelling formats. Reading on misogyny can be replaced with a comic book illustrating misogyny, misogynoir, all of that. A textbook chapter on gene editing might be replaced by an online simulation of gene editing. So these are all examples that I kind of crowdsourced from my team of things that we've used effectively with our students. And I tried to include a few different fields as well. So hopefully everybody can see, if not your field specifically, an adjacent field being represented here. So I wanted to take one moment to highlight one of our student partners. This is from a resource that he created called Shifting the Role, Creating Cognitive Comprehension, that is really about using multimedia effectively. He noted that one major benefit that students shared when he was interviewing other students about the use of multimedia instruction was that they could pause, comprehend, and consume the information at their own pace as they're interacting with the materials. Students mentioned that when they simply read, they did not fully comprehend, whereas multimedia has the potential to create a better educational experience. Students are required to transform and synthesize ideas differently when they are offered the option to listen and use visuals. So we're going to get into kind of breaking this down of why all of this is so important and why this works to use multimedia for students. But first, do another little quick check-in. What are some of the benefits that you've seen of assigning a variety of media? Maybe you switched from using a more traditional kind of text to replacing it with something more interactive or a video or a podcast. So yeah, in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like. What are some of the benefits that you've seen? Thanks, Hannah, for sharing that resource. Yeah, I like that. It benefits students who haven't read for whatever reason. We don't know all the reasons why students might not read. Um, but I know even for me personally, there's only so much I can take in by reading in one day, and students have a lot of reading to do for a lot of their classes. So replacing it with a different option can be a great way to um, help them engage with the material more productively. Students are usually excited to prepare for class and do the homework. Yeah, when they see a different medium being used, they're more willing to watch a video than read an article. I think that's also true. How are we, if our focus is on getting them to learn, then, presenting that material, having them engage with the material in a format that works better for them, should be the priority. As someone with dyslexia, it's easier to process information in an audio video. So I keep that in mind when working with faculty. That is such a great point to bring up. It's more accessible a lot of the time, not always, but we'll talk more about accessibility for a lot of this session. It allows us to bring more diversity of identities, of who is presenting, another thing that we'll bring up again, but when we limit ourselves to academic texts, we limit ourselves to the trends in academia and scholarship production. But when we expand that, then we have a lot more options. Thank you all for contributing those. So what I'd like to go over for the next few minutes is why use multimedia. You all hit on quite a few of them already, but we'll just go over them. Diversifying materials beyond the canonical materials of your discipline. It's essential from the Universal Design for Learning, UDL perspective. And that's really what I'm going to focus on in our 30-minute session here is why is it so important from a UDL perspective? Okay, so what are those principles again? Might need a reminder. One of the big principles in UDL is representation. So this is kind of an obvious connection to using multimedia. We're exposing students to the same concept or skill through multiple representations of that concept in order to allow for deeper learning. It helps to triangulate that concept or skill when we see it from a number of different representations. And we reach more students, as mentioned, because students might connect with a particular way of explaining it more than another way. So having a video explanation, a text explanation, maybe an interactive engagement if possible, all of these can make sure that something reaches each student. Another principle of UDL is engagement. So motivating students to engage with the course materials according to their goals and interests leads to deeper engagement. We're offering them points of connection that can be meaningful to their personal career, academic aims. When students feel connected to the materials, like it speaks to their lives, they typically engage more deeply and learn more. So having that as an option is great. They all have different relationships because of their personal values to the material. And then when possible, if we can allow students to choose to focus on the options that are most meaningful to them, that also increases engagement. So maybe they don't have to read or engage with every single type of material that you're presenting, but you have the same material presented in an article, a video, and a podcast, and they can choose what medium they relate to most effectively. The last principle, big principle of UDL is action and expression. So that's offering students a variety of options for how they demonstrate their knowledge. And presenting multimedia offers students models for how they can demonstrate their knowledge in diverse ways. Again, some of these can be more relevant to the student's goals. For example, if they are looking to go into a particular industry where communication is mostly oral, they might want to share what they're learning orally, and they might want to create a podcast. They might want to create a video of themselves presenting or just have a presentation. All of these are easier for the students. So you support them more if you've shown them how professionals, how that's been done successfully in other spaces. So these kinds of things, especially when they're included in both in bigger assessments, but even in in-class activities, the more formative, shorter assessments can be great ways to make sure students are equipped to choose how they express themselves according to those strengths and goals. Maybe I'll pause here really quick for any questions, comments, ideas. We'll have a little discussion coming up in a moment as well. All right. So just as a reminder, this isn't simply about adding more content, right? Shed went over yesterday for those of you who were present, the reasons why reducing the amount of materials to engage with can be really great for students to engage more deeply. That recording will be posted if anyone wasn't able to make it. But just quickly, using fewer materials encourages deeper engagement, but we're also keeping cost and accessibility in mind. We are trying not to force students to buy a bunch of things. So when we're assigning any kind of material, we want to make sure that it's not behind paywalls whenever possible. There's, especially outside of academia, there's so much that's available for free, but you might have a New York Times subscription. That doesn't mean all your students do. So download things when possible to share, and just be cognizant of that. There are a lot of paywalls in academia, but there's also a lot of paywalls elsewhere. And then again, I've said this a few times, but incorporate opportunities for student choice where you can. It really does benefit their learning and engagement with material, and will just show that your concern is with their goals, their interests, their values, and that will bring a lot more engagement into the course. So for the rest of the time, I wanted to keep that pretty short, and we might not even take the full 30 minutes, but what new types of media could you use in your courses to support your students in reaching your learning objectives? And also, what kinds of questions or ideas or worries do you have about any of this? Any wonderings? I'll give everyone a little time to think about it, and then we can open it up to a little discussion about, how this all sits with you and what your thoughts are. And actually, I'm gonna feel free to unmute yourself, or you can put it in the chat. Reba said, a concern is making sure that students still retain information literacy and know which sources are verifiable and not. That's a great point. And especially if we're asking students to engage with a website that we have deemed reliable, how do they translate that skill into their own working with a website and figuring out for themselves whether it's reliable? And another thing is to consider student created media for assignments, especially in the age of AI. I'd love to talk more about both of these. Does anyone have thoughts on making sure students can assess the reliability of a resource?
I'm not sure if the library, if because I think that some of the librarians may have good resources on that. But also one of the things that I think some of my faculty have done in SOE has been to like share different types of resource uh organizations that students might someday professionally join,
Mm.
um, just to kind of sort out what is reliable from all the noise.
I think that's a great idea. I've worked with libraries in the past with my students. I haven't done it at American University yet, but a lot of times librarians have presentations they can give, classes they can give on assessing reliability. And of course, we can also teach that, but it's a nice way to get students connected to the libraries and some exposure there. Um, and they'll talk about lots of different um, formats in my experience. Mac, yeah.
Yeah, to that same point, I would say their information literacy is like a portion of all of our courses, and I try really hard not to try and assess things that I haven't taught my students. So at least in every course that I've taught so far, and I'm a biologist, so I mostly teach like biology courses or courses about viruses, things like that. We always start every single class, not every single class period, but every course that I'm teaching, I always start with some sort of information literacy activity. And in that activity, I typically try to include a few different um, like types of resources that they could look at. So like including a video, a peer-reviewed article that's good, a peer-reviewed article that's been retracted, uh,
Mm.
and like one or two more options. And then we talk through those resources and how you determine whether or not that's like a, I don't know, like a scholarly source is usually the terminology that we use there, or that I use.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I love that you even show an academic article that's been retracted, and it kind of shows that, we all make mistakes sometimes. Chelsea.
Yeah, I don't want to get us too far off track, but it is making me think of a challenge I actually had in class today because I gave students option to use a podcast episode or do a reading. And I think in class discussion, I kind of found that the podcast episode, I mean, and I vetted them, but the podcast episode definitely like did not give them the same type of depth that the reading had. So I think in relation to questions about maybe information literacy, but also just kind of thinking about giving options, I'm wondering if we have any thoughts about how we balance, maybe multimedia that will, of course, probably go into less depth on certain issues than a reading would, or vice versa. Sometimes the multimedia might be more in depth than the reading is.
I love that point, like focusing on how we can use different types of materials to scaffold concepts. So maybe the students benefit a lot from that lighter version first, so that when they go into the deeper reading, they have a little bit of background and context to understand it. And they might be able to engage with that more theoretical, academic, whatever that more complex, deeper text is. They can engage with that better having had the lighter one. So great thing to think about. Any other thoughts on this, or we can think about Rachel's comment on AI?
I have a quick response to Chelsea. I was going to type up, but I might as well say it. I've had that same challenge with students and going between a reading and a podcast or a TED Talk or whatnot. And then the kind of the middle ground I've come to is I still assign maybe one really important foundational reading. And then in addition to that, give students a choice between, say, 3 to 5 TED Talks or 3 to 5 podcast episodes to like supplement the reading. Whereas in the past, it might have been you have 3 readings to do. Now it's one really important reading to get that depth, and then the TED Talks and podcasts maybe give the breadth or the diversity and experience or whatnot. So I don't think multimedia means like get rid of readings, but trade some of them out and be more careful about which ones we're selecting.
Yeah, I really like that, and especially how you mentioned how the podcasts or TED Talks or whatever else you're adding in do add a breadth of experience that you won't usually get in an academic article, whether that's from professional experience, direct community experience, again, thinking about musicology, what are people who are listening to music saying? And yeah, all of that can give students a different kind of depth, as well as, you know, the broader depth. Just keeping an eye on the time and wanting to make sure we do talk about this AI creating media for assignments. Rachel, have you tried that? Have you tried creating media?
Hi. So, yeah, sort of. So some of the SOE faculty will have like students submit videos or video presentations or do flip grids. PlayPosit has also rolled out like learner made bulbs, so an instructor can assign students to do an assignment and they'll submit a video recording, and that allows them to provide like targeted feedback. So it's really just thinking about like different ways that people can submit to an assignment, and like just like the variety of ways. So like maybe they're really good at synthesizing the information into a presentation, whereas writing like a full-length paper, it just like kind of might reduce that gap.
So like the assessment that the student submits would have maybe some writing and some video and maybe graphic, like a combination, I think, is that?
Yeah, so I think when like we're talking about like, for example, in PlayPosit, if they were to do it that way, like they could go and find a YouTube video, add comments to it, or upload their own like presentation, and then it becomes a dialogue between like the instructor and the student in terms of like the feedback component. Or you could assign it as a peer review, and maybe they're reviewed by several of their peers, and it then becomes a dialogue. I've also had faculty use it for posting in like a discussion board and switching it so that it stays in Canvas as a discussion board, and just, you know, using like the live capture from Kaltura.
Could you put some of the links to those in the chat if you don't mind? I think that'd be helpful. I've used Perusall. I'm a big fan of Perusall because you can upload different types of media into there and have students comment on it and engage with each other. So I think that might sort of be similar effect. But yeah, having that conversation become more rich between the students and the instructor, and also with the content kind of engaging more actively and entering into that scholarly conversation through more access points. Any other thoughts before we wrap up?
And then, so just And then just to like clarify the AI comment, by having like learners create video content or presentations and doing these other modalities, you're kind of removing that the ability to use an AI to kind of generate a written article or written content.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So
I
especially,
know that it's like that can be done with video and graphics. However, like that does also become cost prohibitive, and there are other barriers to that.
yeah, the AI is a topic we could talk about for hours. I know our AI coffee chats have been quite popular. But yeah, just reflecting on sometimes we want our students to be engaging AI and we can do that conscientiously, and sometimes we don't. And this is a great way to guide students away from that, to not tempt them in any way to use it, and if anything, tempt them to engage without the mediation of AI. Thanks for putting that link in the chat. So I have a few links also that I would like to share. I'll include the copy of the slides in a follow-up email, but we have this diversifying course materials resource up that's new for us, and a few others as well, the Universal Design for Learning main website cast, and our own accessible course design website, and then the student partner website that Hannah put in the chat earlier. So you'll have access to those once I share the slides. And yeah, thank you all for joining us. I think Lindsay will put a link in the chat for a survey. Yes, thank you, Lindsay. And thank you all for attending. I think we can
All
wrap
right.
up. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. Bye.
Bye.